All right. I think there are still people arriving, but let's get started anyway. This is part 25 of our series on the first chapter of Sanhedrin. And we are going to be tonight on pages 12b and 13a. If you are at some point in the future, or for that matter, right now, watching and you would like to contact me or ask to be added to the mailing list, I'm Deborah Klapper at gmail.com. Okay, so we begin by referencing something that we saw last week and saying that we want to discuss it further. Then we're going to spend a fair amount of time on the details of the calendar and the solar calendar. The vocabulary is difficult and things get a little bit twisted, but hopefully we can make sense out of it. Okay. Gufa. We quoted this, but we didn't really talk about it, so now we're going to quote it again and talk about it further. Amar Shmuel. Eina abriat hashana biyom shloshim shel Adar, ho'il v'ra'ui lekov o Nisan. So Shmuel had said that you can't declare a leap year on the 30th day of Adar, since it could have been Nisan. So we need just a moment to talk about the significance of this date of the 30th of Adar. So in the old system, which the Mishnah still which Shmuel still assumes is functional, in the old system, the Rosh Chodesh is either declared on the 30th of the previous month or on the 31st of the previous month, making either a 29-day month or a 30-day month, depending on when witnesses come and say that they saw the moon, or if they don't come at all, then it's the second of those 2 days. Okay, so the 30th of Adar is possibly the 30th of Adar, or possibly it's going to be the 1st of Nisan. We don't know yet what the date is. We don't know at this moment what month it will turn out to have been all day, because once it's declared, it's retroactive for the whole day. And the leap year can only be declared in Nisan. You can't declare a leap year once Adar has leap year can only be declared in Adar. Once Adar ends and it becomes Nisan, you can't declare a leap year. So this day is kind of, I don't know, Schrodinger's date or something. There's no way to find out what date it is at the time when you're making this decision, and whether or not you can make the year into a leap year depends on an answer you can't get. Okay, in any case, so Shmuel says, so don't declare a leap year that day. It's over. Just end the system a day early. But the Gemara says, okay, but what happens if they did? Suppose that they do declare that there's going to be a leap year, and then suppose that witnesses show up and say, we saw the moon last night. So now what? Your choices are, you can ignore the witnesses or not accept them to begin with, in which case today stays the 30th of Adar. It turns out that your behavior in declaring a leap year was retroactively okay, and it stays a leap year. That's choice one. Choice two is you can accept the witnesses and make today Nisan. And in that case, then there are two possibilities. Either we say that you succeeded in making it a leap year, or you didn't succeed in making it a leap year. Or there's the third possibility, which is that you succeeded in making it a leap year and you succeeded in making it Rosh Chodesh, in which case today is actually not Nisan, not the 1st of Nisan, today is the 1st of Adar, which would be a little bit of deja vu since you had that already 30 days ago. Okay, so let's see the position. Ibru Hamai. So what happens if they did in fact declare a leap year on the 30th of Adar? Amar Ula, ein mekad shinat hachodesh. Ula says, well, okay, then don't accept the witnesses, don't sanctify a Rosh Chodesh today. Even if the new moon was seen last night, still don't do it. Just keep today Adar. Well, that's all well and good as long as that's what you do, but Kidshu Mai. What happens if they did in fact? Heather, did you want to say something?
No.
Okay. What happens if they did in fact declare it to be Rosh Chodesh? So now, is it Rosh Chodesh? And if so, of what month? Amar Rava, Batel Ha'ibur. Rava says, well, if today is Rosh Chodesh, then we can't possibly have declared a leap year this morning. So therefore, we didn't declare a leap year. Therefore, today is the 1st of Nisan, and tough, we don't have a leap year this year. On the other hand, Rav Nachman Amar, Me'ubaru Mekudash. Rav Nachman says, well, actually, no, both things worked. Today is we did declare a leap year, and it's also Rosh Chodesh. But when we declared a leap year, that meant the next month was going to be Adar. So now today is the 1st of Adar Bet. Which, by the way, this whole declaring a leap year after Purim must be incredibly confusing, because if you did Purim in Adar Aleph, it doesn't work, it doesn't count. So can you imagine if somebody comes to you a week and a half after Purim and says, haha, that wasn't really Purim, we're doing Purim again in 3.5 weeks? You'd be like, how much candy can one person eat in this lifetime? Well, you don't really have to eat candy, but it's confusing to have the calendar repeat itself like that, especially when it hasn't been announced in advance. But that's what we're going to. Rava is going to challenge Rav Nachman on, although Rava's challenge would be, I think, stronger if he was talking about the whole second half of Adar rather than just this one day. But Amrli Rava le Rav Nachman. Rava says to Rav Nachman, Michti Puria lepischa tiltin yomina. Rava says to Rav Nachman, let's see. From Purim to Pesach is supposed to be 30 days. Umi Puria darshinan v'hilchot Pesach. And so from Purim, we start teaching the laws of Pesach. Now we go off on a little tangent to prove that. Detanya shoalim v'hilchot Pesach kodem lePesach 30 yom. Because it says in a Braita that we ask questions about and teach about the laws of Pesach for 30 days before Pesach. It happens that there are similar texts about other holidays as well. This is Pesach isn't unique in this regard, but that's what we're concerned with here. And Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer Shtei Shabbatot. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says we only teach about the holiday for 2 weeks before the holiday. So we're ignoring Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel here. He was just quoted because he is part of the Braita, but we're interested in the first position. Now Rava is talking again, having quoted the Braita, and he says, "V'chi mati reish yarcha mecharki rachakin le ati lezilzale b'chametz." He says, if when Rosh Chodesh arrives, we push Rosh Chodesh or push Pesach further away, then people are going to decide that chametz is a joke, because we've been telling them for 2 weeks that they need to clean out their cupboards, throw out their chametz, start koshering things, and now we say, never mind, we'll get back to you in a month. And they're never going to take it seriously again. They're always going to say, well, yeah, they told me that I didn't have very much time left before Pesach, but it turned out I had a whole extra month. So they're never going to clean for Pesach on time again. So Rav Nachman responds, Amar le, mida yad'i deshata ma'avrata b'chush b'natalia. The people know that the declaring of leap years depends on math, depends on calculations. And keep in mind that none of the notation that we use to make math easier has been invented yet. We're dealing here with Roman numerals or Hebrew letters, and no notation of the like plus sign equal sign variety. There's no concept of zero. It's not clear to me how you do calculations, but it's certainly harder than it is now. And so the people know that you have to do math. They'll say, well, the rabbis couldn't figure out the math until now. It just took a long time to get their math homework done. And they'll understand. So I would say that Rava and Rav Nachman both have reasonable points here. Okay, so moving on. Now we get to our main topic. So Rav Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, this is the same Shmuel that we quoted a little while ago. I will translate that literally. But then I will tell you what, as far as I can tell, it means. What it literally means is we only make a leap year if the equinox is lacking most of a month. That seems to mean that the fall equinox, the autumnal equinox, is going to be after sometime in the middle of Tishrei. And there's going to be a machloket in a second about when in the middle of Tishrei. But see, we're going to see a pasuk soon that's going to describe Sukkot as happening at a time which they're assuming means in the fall. Whether the words mean that or not is a whole nother kettle of fish, but that's what they think it means. And so we need the autumnal equinox to be before something. Before what exactly is also not clear. Don't worry, it will get more confusing, which is, yeah, this is a confusing one. Okay, so back in Rav Yehuda speaking in the name of Shmuel, there's v'kama ruba chodesh. How much is the majority of a month? Shisha asar yom, divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says most of a month is 16 days, which makes sense. If a month can be as much as 30 days, then in order to get a majority, you need 16 days. That makes sense. Rabbi Yosei omer echad ve'esrim yom. Rabbi Yosei says 21 days. Now that does not seem to be talking about most of a month in any literal sense, but it is the time into the month that he thinks the equinox can slide before there's a problem. And they're both interpreting the same pasuk. So let's get the whole pasuk. We're in Shemot Lamed Daled Kafet. Here we are. V'chag Shavuot ta'aseh lecha bikurei ketzir chitim v'chag ha'asif tufat hashana. And the holiday of Shavuot you will make at the beginning of the wheat harvest. Okay, that's not actually our focus, but it is the beginning of the pasuk, and I said to read the whole thing. V'chag ha'asif, and the holiday of the gathering, which is presumably Sukkot, that's the next holiday on the list, at the tekufa of the year. Now, in the language of the Mishnah and the Gemara, a tekufa is an equinox or a solstice, or sometimes the season. And in this particular case, they seem to be interpreting it as the autumn. Okay. Marsavar kulei chag ba'inan b'tkufa chadasha. One of them says the entire holiday needs to be in the new season. And if the whole holiday has to be in the new season, then fall has to start at the latest at the same time as Sukkot starts. Umar Savar, and the other one thinks, miktzat chag ba'inan b'tkufa chadasha, that at least part of Sukkot needs to be in the new season. And if part of Sukkot needs to be in the new season, then the fall needs to start sometime before Sukkot ends. And by Sukkot this evening, we're going to mean not counting Shmini Atzeret, just the 7 days that are actually the holiday of Sukkot when you eat in a sukkah and you shake a lulav. Okay. But now we want to know what they think about something else. You see, we're secretly worried about the question of whether the equinox is the last day of summer or the first day of fall. So we're going to ask what they must think about this question. If they think Yom Tkufa Gomer, B'lav Hachinam, if they think that the day of the equinox is the end of the summer, then we would need sometimes to make a leap year, even if it does not meet the standard they describe. And then they sort of explain why. Amar Kule Chag Ika. So the one who said that you need the whole holiday, the whole Sukkot, to be in the fall, doesn't have it. He doesn't have what he doesn't have enough days in his calculation, because if the equinox, he said if the equinox is on the 16th or later, we need to make a leap year. But if the equinox is on the 16th and if the equinox is before the 6th, yeah, if the equinox is on the 16th or later, then we make a leap year. The problem with that is that sounds like if the equinox is on the 15th, we don't make a leap year. And the 15th is the first day of Sukkot. So if he thinks that the equinox itself is part of summer, then if the equinox is on the 15th, he's got a problem, because not all of Sukkot is in the fall now. Okay, and as for the other guy, and the guy who said that part of Sukkot needs to be in the fall, he doesn't have it either, because he said that we only make a leap year if the equinox falls after the 21st. But that makes it sound like if the equinox falls on the 21st, then we're not, he said, yeah, there's a typo here. Yeah, in parentheses, it should say because if the equinox falls on the 21st. I'm sorry, that's a mistake. Because if he thinks that the equinox itself is part of summer, then if the equinox falls on the 21st, the whole holiday is in the summer, because the 21st is the last day of Sukkot. So both of these numbers, both 16 and 21, only work if you believe that the equinox is the first day of fall, which I understand that that's how we describe it on our modern American calendars, but there's nothing inherent about that interpretation. There's only just barely something actually significant about the equinox at all. There's certainly no rule about whether it has to be the end of the previous thing or the beginning of the next thing. It's just the convention. I mean, the American one is just a convention. Presumably here they think that there's something legally binding about it. But it must be it must be that both of them think that the equinox is the first day of the fall. Okay, now we have a problem, because it's going to turn out that we have two other presentations of Rabbi Yehuda's position and Rabbi Yosei's position, and that no two of them are the same out of the three. By the way, just to confuse things, we had a minute ago Rav Yehuda quoting Shmuel, quoting Rebbe Yehuda, who is a different person, not related to Rav Yehuda. But there is a very disproportionate number of people in the Talmud named Yehuda, and it's just confusing. Okay, Meitiv. They suggested a tiyufta. A tiyufta is when you have a Mishnaic, or at least a Tannaitic source that contradicts an Amora. And in this case, because Rav Yehuda and Shmuel are quoting Rebbe Yehuda, so even though they're quoting a Tana, they are themselves Amoraim. So when we disprove them about what they said, that's going to be a tiyufta, even though the entire problem, the entire question, is what Rebbe Yehuda and Rebbe Yosei, both of whom are Tanaim, said. So there's a little bit of a strange use of the word tiyufta. Okay, but here we are. Here's our Braita. Yom Tkufa Gomer Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosei Omer Yom Tkufa Matzil. This Braita records a dispute between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Yosei, in which Rabbi Yehuda says that the equinox is the last day of the summer, and Rabbi Yosei says that the equinox is the first day of fall. Now remember that in order to make the quote that we had from Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel work, they both had to believe that it was the first day of fall. Okay, so this definitely contradicts what Rabbi Yehuda had in the name of Shmuel. And here we have another Braita, which will also contradict it, but different. Ve'od Tanya. Another Braita. In Me'abriat Hashana, Ela Imkein Haitat Kufa Chasera Rubo Shel Chodesh. So that starts out sounding the same, right? We only make a leap year if the equinox is missing most of a month, right? Which we said means the equinox is going to fall in the second half of Tishrei. The problem is that it then continues, V'kama rubo shel chodesh, how much is most of a month? Shisha asar yom, 16 days. Rabbi Yehuda omer, shtei adot b'chodesh, v'kama shtei adot, esrim yom. And so somebody, anonymous, said 16 days, and then Rabbi Yehuda says it's 2 parts of a month. And then we said, well, okay, how much is 2 parts of a month? And the answer is 20 days. So this Rabbi Yehuda sounds awfully similar to the position of Rabbi Yosei we had up above, although Rabbi Yosei said 21 days. And the 16 days that we have here sounds exactly the same as the position we had for Rabbi Yehuda up above, but now it's an anonymous third person. And I know it can't be Rabbi Yosei because we're going to quote him in a second. So definitely the positions have at least been switched around. And it also seems that Rabbi Yehuda really said 20, not 21, which would work better with the equinox is the last day of the summer, which a minute ago, is that what Rabbi Yehuda said in the other Braita? Yes. So these two are compatible with each other. If Rabbi Yehuda thinks that the equinox is the last day of the summer, and if he thinks, although we haven't said so yet, if he thinks that you only need part of Sukkot to be in the fall, then that would get you to this number of 20 days, such that if the equinox is going to be on the 21st day, that would mean that all of Sukkot is in the summer, which would be exactly the moment when you need to make a leap year, which is the standard that he said. So I said that the three positions are all mutually exclusive. They're not. These two go together nicely, but they both contradict Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel. Okay, we haven't actually said what the new version of Rabbi Yosei is. Rabbi Yosei Omer, Mechashvin Shisha Asar Lifnei HaPesach Me'abrin. Rabbi Yosei has a completely different calculation, or at least a different calculation. He says, we actually don't look at whether Sukkot is going to fall in the fall at all. We look at whether Pesach is going to fall in the spring, although obviously the two things are connected. But he says, if the vernal equinox is later than the 16th of Nisan, the 16th of Nisan is the second day of Pesach. If the vernal equinox is going to be later than the second day of Pesach, then in fact we make a leap year. And Rashi says, I did not double check his arithmetic, but I don't see any reason that there should be anything wrong with it. Rashi says that if the vernal equinox is on the 17th of Nisan, then the autumnal equinox will be on the 22nd of Tishrei. You should be aware that in the calendar as we have it, as we use it now, all of the months between Nisan and Tishrei always have the same number of days, so that there is a stable number of days between Pesach and Sukkot. All of the adjustments that get made to the calendar get made in the winter. The summer is always exactly the same way. So now the position of Rabbi Yosei here seems to be the same position that we ascribed to Rabbi Yosei a couple of pages ago when Rabbi Yehuda was quoting Shmuel, which is to say that we make a leap month if the autumnal equinox will be on the 22nd of Tishrei or later. So Rabbi Yosei stayed the same. Rabbi Yehuda switched to the position that we thought should have been Rabbi Yosei, but wasn't, in Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. And the position of 16 days just sort of got pushed off to some anonymous person. You can see how all of this is confusing enough that somebody could misquote it without terribly much surprise. And it seems very likely that that's what happened. Rabbi Shimon Omer, but we're not quite done with this. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Af Shisha Asar Lifnei HaChag Ma'av. Rabbi Shimon says, even if the autumnal equinox isn't going to happen by the 16th of Tishrei before Sukkot, then that's a leap year. Whether Rabbi Shimon is the same as the first position is, I believe, something that we will deal with in next week's share. pretty sure this source packet does not go that far. And Acherim Omrim Miuto. The others say that even if the autumnal equinox is going to be in a minority of Tishrei, meaning in the first half of Tishrei, we will still make a leap year of a comma muto. And how much is that first half? 14 days. Okay, so it only pushes it back 2 days from the position of 16 days. And the Gemara ends kashya, which is not normally how a tiyufta ends, right? Normally, either you say, yeah, it's a tiyufta, or you say, nah, it's not really a tiyufta. Let me explain to you why these things are really work together just fine. Kasha usually is from a different style of problem entirely, but it is a weaker language of contradiction, and it means that, yeah, it's a problem, but not necessarily a contradiction, which might be connected to the fact that this was a weird kind of tiyufta to begin with. All right, I made this packet shorter than normal because it was super confusing, and I was hoping that we could address the astronomical confusion at the end, although it may be even shorter than I thought it was. I didn't realize it was only going to take me half an hour, and for that I apologize, but do people in fact have questions?
Yes, I think the whole thing is like one big question. I'd be happy if you'd start at the beginning and do it again. I mean, now that you went through it once, now I need to really absorb it. So let's go through it again. But
yeah, okay.
The whole end part for, I mean, this is minor even, but you have the equinox, and we're saying that they can determine it in advance.
Certain. I mean, the astronomical calculations that they did to know when the equinox was going to be are accurate enough that not very long after Rav Yehuda and Shmuel, I don't remember exactly how long, but it's, on the scale of like 100 years, not on the scale of 1,000 years. The calculations that we're still basing the calendar on were done. And they were good enough that although they were off by, I think, a few minutes in the cycle of the moon, we're not going to need to adjust anything that they told us to do still for hundreds of years into the future. So yes, their astronomy was extraordinary. Their ability to express themselves clearly in Aramaic on a piece of paper is a different story.
But they were able to determine the equinox, but not to determine how long a month was.
So no, they knew exactly what the cycle of the moon was. That's not the problem. The problem is, the reason why we're using witnesses isn't because we don't know whether the moon should be visible or not. The reason we're using witnesses is because they have a midrash on the words HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem, which is in Parshat Bo, when Hashem is first telling Moshe about a calendar, right, about Pesach. Right. And the thing is that the word Zeh in midrash is always taken to mean that you're pointing at something.
Right.
You're indicating a physical object. So if God says this month to Moshe, he must have taken him outside and be showing him the moon. Well, he has to be showing him something. What else are you going to point at when you say this month? So the month is an abstraction. So the midrash there says that God took Moshe outside and said, when you see that the moon looks like this, you should say today is Rosh Chodesh. And that is taken to be a mitzvah to be Mekadesh al pi re'iyah, to declare the month by looking at the moon. Now, the fact that we decided to do it with witnesses rather than having the court themselves go outside and look at the sky might have something to do with the fact that, sometimes it's cloudy in Yerushalayim, but you can see it in Tel Aviv, and you don't want to restrict yourself just to what you can see in Yerushalayim. But the the calculating of astronomical phenomena is hard without modern calculating techniques. And so it was like a little bit of a specialty. We saw last week that Rabbi Akiva had to calculate out into the future multiple years before he was killed by the Romans, because there wasn't anyone else who could do the arithmetic for them. And he was about to die. Right. So like, it's not like everybody can do it, but there are certainly people who can do it. The information is available. And that's not why we're using witnesses. We're using witnesses because we think there's a mitzvah to go outside and see if the moon looks like what God showed Moshe.
Okay. So back to the calculating when the equinox is going to be. Say they do that, and then, some of the Braitas say, then we impregnate the year.
Mm-hmm.
But they can only do that in Nisan. So,
right. So
does that
you
mean,
can not even in Nisan? You can only do it in at the latest in Adar, and it would be a lot better if you did it in Shvat, so that people know before Purim that it's not Purim.
But I thought we said at some point they can only impregnate the year during Nisan.
No, what we said was the only month you can add is Adar. You can declare the year impregnated starting at Rosh Hashanah. We actually saw a case of that 2 weeks ago, maybe. I don't remember. You can't do it as early as in the summer, but once it's past Rosh Hashanah and until the end of Adar is when you can make the declaration. But whenever you make the declaration, the only month that gets added is the first Adar. So,
okay.
And that's obviously much less confusing if you do it before you've actually already celebrated Purim, and then you tell people, no, wait, we need to do Purim again.
Right, of course.
But you could theoretically, and they did, know many years in advance exactly when the equinox is going to fall. And whatever your standard is, that all of Sukkot has to be in the fall, or part of Sukkot has to be in the fall, you can, know when that's going to be a problem. We were using a tripartite rule, though, where the equinox was only one of 3 factors, and you needed 2 out of 3 in order to make a leap year. So you might still need to wait and see what the condition of the roads looks like, or what the condition of the barley looks like, in order to use that as a second factor.
I see.
Although we've long since abandoned that, and we just do the astronomy, because there was no way in the 2nd or 3rd century that they could look forward and know that in 2022 the barley was not going to be ready in time.
I also thought that a lot of the calendar was based on Pesach and how Pesach is going to fall out rather than Sukkot.
So the Pesach is the roads and the barley and the animals, right? All of those are about Pesach. The roads need to be repaired in time for people to arrive for Pesach. The animals need to mature enough to sacrifice them at Pesach. The barley needs to be ready in time for the Omer sacrifice, but not ready so early that there won't be anything to eat until after Pesach, because you ran out of food already. All of those are spring concerns, but the equinox is about fall. Not that it matters, because they're connected, right? There's
right.
Rashi describes it, there's 182 days, which is not, it's more like 182 and a half days, but nothing I can do about that, between the spring equinox and the fall equinox, and there's always going to be exactly the same amount of time from one to the other. That's so whatever decisions you make about Sukkot are also sort of about Pesach, and vice versa. Right.
Just I never saw the focus being on how Sukkot falls, or how something falls on Sukkot rather than Pesach.
Well, that's what the pasuk happens to be about. Although what Bat Hashanah means is a little bit obscure too. But there's something about how it falls in the seasons that's supposed to be the way it is.
So back to the beginning of what we of our shiur tonight, where again we said we can't do Ibor Shana on the 30th day of Adar.
Correct. Because it's might be too late already. Right? It's either the last possible day or it's the day after the last possible day.
Okay.
Because depending on whether or not it becomes the 1st of Nisan.
I see. Okay. Okay. So now I get that. So are they doing Ibor Chodesh and Ibor Shana is kind of all mixed up in here. Sometimes they're talking about one and sometimes they're talking about the other.
Well, especially on the 30th of Adar, the two are connected to each other. Because if Adar ends up being a long month, then you can still make a leap year today. And if Adar ends up not being a long month, then you can't. So they get tangled that way.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Anybody else have a question?
How do they get married on the last day of the month if you want to do a marriage contract and you don't even know what day it is?
So contracts are allowed to be off, I believe, by 1 day anyway, because we assume a lot of times people don't get the news about what the date is. So it's not just that last day when you don't yet know the date, but 3 or 4 days later, if you live far enough away or are clueless enough, you might not know the correct date. And I mean, we kill people in a murder trial if the witnesses are a day off from each other about when the murder happened. But theoretically, it's not clear we've ever killed anybody in that kind of trial, but in principle, we would. So dates are always taken to be a little bit approximate because of it's difficult for everybody to keep track of the system. But that day in particular, my guess would be that you might, note in the contract that, today is either the 30th day of Adar or the 1st day of Nisan, depending on what happens with the month or something like that. Like it certainly would be possible to write it so that it wasn't ambiguous about what day it happened on. It'll still be ambiguous about what the date is. And you only need a contract to get married because we declared rabbinically that you do. From the Torah, all you need is to exchange an object. So in theory, you could also write the ketubah the next day, but in practice, we would not allow that because you're not allowed to be married without one. But that's something that's going to happen on average every other month. It's not specific to Adar and Nisan. And yes, it must have been terribly confusing. Anyone else?
So again, back to the beginning, where actually it's talking about Ibor Chodesh.
Well, it's kind of talking about, but what they're calling, where it uses the word Ibor, it's only talking about Ibor Shana. When they want to talk about the Chodesh, they use Mekadesh.
Mekadeshin, right. Okay, so Amar Ula, Ein Mekadshin et HaChodesh. So if they did on the 30th of Adar say that the year is Ibor or the Chodesh is Ibor? Which one
Yeah,
are we talking about in the question?
If they have declared a leap year on the
A-
30th of Adar, right? So they announced
Uh-huh.
that there's going to be another Adar. Pesach is in fact 6 weeks from now. We're doing Purim again in 2 weeks, right? All of these very confusing things. If they did that, then Ula says, well, okay, now you got to shut down the court so that there's no chance of turning today into Nisan, because then you'll have a contradiction. And nobody disagrees with it. That's certainly the correct move at that moment. The problem is what happens if the court messed up, and that's not what they did. And then we end up with the dispute between Rava and Rav Nachman about what happens.
So in other words, the court should know. How would they know? Like, what do you mean the court messed up? If they come and say, let's make it
I think, although I don't know for sure, that what's going on here is not that the court didn't know that today's the 30th of Adar, or even that they didn't know that they're not supposed to do this on the 30th of Adar. Just that whatever reasons they have for declaring a leap year didn't become clear until today, or they couldn't meet until today, or they were all in a Roman dungeon until today, whatever it is. These people are now living in a free society. So for whatever reason, they decided that it's enough of an emergency that they are in fact going to, sorry, what happened to my screen? They decided that they are in fact going to declare a leap year. And what Ula is saying is, okay, if that's what you're doing, then now you got to make sure retrospectively that it worked by not making today the 1st of Nisan. And then I don't know what the next step is that gets you to actually making today the 1st of Nisan. My guess is this is a thought experiment. It's not something that ever actually happened. But even if it did happen, it could be that it happened because they, forgot to tell the door guard not to let the witnesses in. Having let the witnesses in, then they figured they might as well listen to them. Now, having heard compelling testimony, they just can't bear to, have a calendar that's not astronomically accurate. Or they, there were people on the court who didn't think that this was the right thing to do. And, there was a disagreement. In the end, they voted, and what they ended up doing wasn't 100% coherent, because when you're a democratic body and you vote, sometimes you vote to do things that contradict each other.
Right.
Decision is separate. So that would be my guess, but it's entirely possible that it's just a fun thought experiment, and it never was expected to actually happen.
As in a lot of places in the Gemara.
Yeah, although it's hard to tell which is which, and some of the thought experiments, many of them have turned out later to be useful and important because the case ends up turning into something real. Right. There are cases in just earlier today, somebody was telling me about a case in a Tuma context, in which there's a question about what happens if you're in a closed box flying through the air over a cemetery. Okay, that was it was a fantasy then, but it's not a fantasy now. So
yeah,
some of these things turn out useful in the end.
And we didn't resolve the dispute between Ula and Rava.
Nobody disagrees with Ula. It's between Rava and Rav Nachman, and weirdly,
oh, right. Sorry,
they seem to be having a policy discussion about what is or isn't confusing to people, rather than a metaphysics discussion about what did God do with the calendar when we flipped these switches, which I find really interesting, because I would have thought it would be a metaphysical conversation, but it doesn't. It seems to be a policy issue. But no, we don't have a resolution, which
Right,
might just be because we often don't have a resolution, or might be because nobody expected it to ever matter.
Right, I just want to make sure I understood, because we went right after that, we went off into the tangent about the equinox. And
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if anything we learned from that tangent can be applied back to this disagreement before we went on the tangent.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think it's going to turn out in practice, in the event that we ever reinstate this calendar system and it ever happens, we'll have to vote. And half of people will think the calendar's, or somewhat less than half of people will think the calendar is wrong. But it will not be the first time, right? There's I think it's in the second chapter of Rosh Hashanah in the Mishnah, Rabban Gamliel accepts witnesses for the month that Rabbi Yoshua is sure are lying. We saw this a year and a half ago or so.
Yep.
And in the end, Rabban Gamliel gets his way, and Rabbi Yoshua has to go around to a whole collection of different rabbis trying to figure out whether like he can go on with his relationship with the Jewish people now that the calendar's wrong.
Yeah.
And they end up deciding, no, actually, whatever they vote on, that's all the calendar there is. God doesn't have a calendar other than what the rabbis vote on.
Right.
Which is a really intriguing idea.
I know.
Anyway.
Just as a very quick side question, Rabban Gamliel really is like bullyish.
Rabban Gamliel seems to be very insecure of his power. Whether that's because Rabbi Yehoshua
tested him a lot.
Yeah, or is deliberately setting him up to look weak, or whether it's because Rabban Gamliel is paranoid, depends on what order you think the stories in the Gemara are in. And since it never tells us what order they happened in, there are different ways you can construe the situation.
Mm-hmm.
This is a machloket in my house. I tend to think that Rabbi Yoshua is the good guy, and my husband tends to think that Rabban Gamliel is the good guy. But it really does depend what order you read the Gemaras in. Because there's also a Gemara in which Rabbi Yoshua openly, it would seem, insults Rabban Gamliel at Rabban Gamliel's son's wedding. It's not a pretty scene.
Yeah, from the parts, the sugyas that I've learned, I came away with the impression that Rabbi Yehoshua was the good guy, was the victim a lot.
Right. So if those sugyas happened first, then Rabbi Yehoshua has just been pushed beyond endurance and he can't take it anymore. And he says something at Rabban Gamliel's kid's wedding. On the other hand, if Rabbi Yehoshua, if the first thing he does is actually to get up into the drasha at somebody else's kid's wedding about how the other guy is wrong and is an ignoramus, then, actually, you can see how this might.
Yeah, that doesn't look too good. Yeah, I have not learned that one.
Yeah, okay, well, maybe we'll do it together at some point, but
love it.
Yeah, it depends what order you do them.
I see.
Anyway.
Okay, good to know. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. I will see you guys next week. Thank you for having your patience.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Have a good night.
Have a good night.
Thank you, Deborah.
Bye.
Thank you.